What is up, everybody? I'm finally here. We have finally made it. My part one of my series talking about disordered eating, eating disorders, as well as eating disorder recovery, and sharing my story, sharing my tactics for how I healed through having an eating disorder. Thanks for coming along. Let's finally get to it. So, some people see my pictures or my content that I've posted the past few months about the way that my body looked when I was a competitive bodybuilder, and they think, wow, Tiffany, I was not that extreme. I don't have that much of an issue with food, with my body. I didn't diet that hard. This content that I want to share is to just show anyone who has any type of disordered eating or strange relationship with their body, has a lot of body dysmorphia. Maybe you yo-yo diet a lot, or you restrict your calories and end up binging. If you have a weird relationship with food, I feel like this content can be helpful or beneficial. Just take whatever pieces feel best for you, right? Today, I'm going to be sharing my own story, how I started with restricting food, how it led to an eating disorder, and all the little bits in between. It's gonna be a pretty detailed story today. So fasten your seatbelts. I grew up a competitive dancer, so definitely within the dance community, there's a lot of pressure about the way that bodies should look. We grow up in a society that, especially for women, shows us that we need to be thin and be able to wear low-rise jeans and have big boobs and, gorgeous faces that are not puffy. We don't want to look old. We don't want to look fat, all these different things. And I definitely compared myself to girls and women in movies when I was a kid. I also compared myself to my mom and my sister, who were and are just absolute gorgeous women. Always just had this perfect physique in my mind. They were very lean. They had big boobs. They had these like gorgeous big brown eyes. I was just like, oh my gosh. And I was just this like awkward, no boob, pear-shaped kind of gal, and just always thought there was something wrong with me. My mom would often do different types of diets, different types of calorie restriction when I was young. I don't think she realized the impact or the influence that it had on me at the time. Seeing her just trying to fit into a dress to go to a wedding, she'd be going on these kind of extreme diets for short periods of time, and it did really impact the way that I saw my own body and the way that I treated my body as I got older. My mom and I are very close. She's definitely come to realize a lot of things about her own fat phobia. We do live in a society that is very fat phobic, especially her generation. Moving forward now, I feel like we're in an era that has a little bit more acceptance when it comes to a little more acceptance. My power's shorting out. Shit. I'm on a roll. Come on. A little more acceptance when it comes to body shapes. Oh my gosh, it won't stop. It's storming today. Okay, anyway, we're gonna continue. With all that being said, at age 12, 13, I had been teased a little bit in my tween years and really just wanted to feel beautiful. I was in this, very awkward body, as I said, and I began to restrict my calories. When I was 13, I went through my last growth spurt I ever went through. So the combination of restricting calories and having a growth spurt, I was suddenly really skinny and really cute, and I was already pretty popular. So it was a really good time, and I felt really good about myself, and all these boys were noticing me, and I was like, oh my gosh. In 8th, 9th grade, I gained some of that weight back. My body was just going through different fluctuations that we do as teens. Once I got to be about 16, I was really struggling because I was beginning to really yo-yo diet. I was noticing that every time I would try to do something different, whether it was increase my exercise, decrease my calories, or the combination of the two, I kept gaining more weight. And I felt like an absolute monster when I was 16. I just felt like I was the ugliest person in the world. I was also in an interesting phase where I'd kind of realized, like, oh, I'm not going to be beautiful like my mom and my sister. I'm not going to be beautiful like my friends. So how about I just lean into this kind of like weird artsy version of me? Now, don't get me wrong. I feel like that expression of me was a huge part of my creative and artistic expression. However, I do feel like the making of my own clothes, the layering of a lot of clothes, and the kind of overall just making myself less appealing to other people, I felt was very safe. It felt like a way that I could be myself and not worry about fitting into this mold of being beautiful. I did still feel very off. I felt like my body was just unacceptable. I wouldn't hug anyone because I just felt like I was this big pillow person. I was definitely in a deep depression at the time. So when I was like 17, 18, I did probably the most extreme diet that I had, which was called the HCG diet. It required you to take this particular tincture that you would ingest, or some people injected it, and it would give your body the ability to eat very low calories. I don't remember the science behind it, honestly. Basically, for an entire month, I was eating 500 calories a day, and that was on top of having a job, having dance 13 to 15 hours a week, being in student council, just everything I was doing at the time, plus restricting my calories, especially that low. Nobody can function on that low of calories. Please know that. I don't think even little kids can only run on 500 calories a day. Like, that's ridiculous. So, of course, during that for initial month, I lost a lot of weight. I think I lost around 35 pounds in a month, which is not healthy for the body in any way. Immediately after, I felt like what I was experiencing with binge eating prior was nothing compared to what happened after that. At that point, I began to blackout binge, is what I call it. What would happen to me is I would get in front of some kind of food, whether it was something I just made or something in the cabinet, something in the fridge, whatever, and my body would take over and it would shut my brain down. So I did, don't really have much recollection of the moments when I was in this like trance-like place, and I would just eat and eat and eat. Sometimes it would be 5 minutes, sometimes it would be an hour. And I would wake up from this trance to realize, oh my God, I just ate that entire box of cereal, or I just ate that entire tray of chicken that I just prepped, or whatever it was, whether it was healthy or not healthy, I would black out binge. In response to that, my body went from losing 35 pounds to immediately gaining about 40 very shortly after. And this is what we call yo-yo dieting. Yo-yo dieting is where we are losing weight, and then by restricting calories, by over-exercising, and then we gain more weight. And then we lose some weight, and then we gain more weight. So it's always this little staircase, right? And it's always a little harder to lose weight every time that we do it. We're gonna talk a lot more about yo-yo dieting in future videos. I found myself getting into this yo-yo dieting really intensely in my late teens, and I just felt miserable. I felt miserable in my body. I felt like I had no control around food. Every time I tried to do some kind of diet or some kind of exercise regimen, I just found myself failing. I just hated myself more and more, and I wanted to do anything possible to be skinny. So I got married very young. I was 19, and I moved away from my hometown. It was really tough. My husband at the time was in the military. He was gone frequently because of deployments or different things he had to do at work, and I was really alone. It was really easy to binge at the time. I did get a gym membership, and I began learning how to weight train. Of course, I wanted my coach to spot train with me, which is like, you don't like your arms or your stomach, so you're like, I just want to do arm workouts and ab workouts. And of course, he explained to me that that's not how that worked, but I still was, dead set on that. With the weight training, like most women going into it, I was worried about getting too bulky. I didn't want to gain a bunch of muscle or look like a man. The summer when I was 20, I ended up stumbling upon a couple of blogs that were about these really beautiful women who had some muscle mass, who were weight training. And their whole blog was about how important weight training is for the human body in general. I thought when I was first seeing these different women who were creating these blogs was, oh, well, I'm like a bigger framed woman, right? So, being a bodybuilder, being muscular has to be way easier than being skinny. Now, don't get me wrong, gaining muscle is a healthier route to losing body fat, mostly because the more muscle you have, the more body fat that you naturally burn, even while resting. But it was just so silly of me to think it was easier to look like someone like Dana Lynn Bailey in a matter of a year than it was to look like a supermodel. Both of them nearly impossible, but overall, I was dead wrong about thinking it was easy. Anyway, I used bodybuilding.com, and they had all kinds of workouts back then that you could reference, like all kinds of programs. So I started really just diving into weight training on my own. At the time, I also started teaching classes at my gym. I was teaching all over at LA Fitnesses in the Seattle area. I really was just falling in love with fitness. I was still struggling with binging. I definitely was a compulsive exerciser at the time. So, my purging wouldn't necessarily be like throwing anything up like someone with bulimia would, but it would be, oh no, I ate too much. I'm gonna go to the gym and get extra cardio today, or whatever the case may be. Fast forward, when I was 21, I ended up moving from Washington State to Georgia. That's really where my passion took off, because I didn't really have any friends, and I just wanted to get involved in a community here around the gym life. I started teaching classes almost immediately. I was teaching dance classes at my gym, as well as boot camps, different things like that. And it was honestly really fun. I built a community really fast. I was in love with what I was doing. I still couldn't figure out why I was crying every day. And the bottom line was that I still really hated myself. And a lot of the decisions I was making around my body, around my food, around my movement practices had to do with being smaller. Even if I was building muscle, it was all about being leaner, taking up less space, being seen as beautiful. And no matter how small I got, I was never satisfied. When I was 22, I started working with my first coach. He got me on a plan to start getting ready for my first show, which was about 6 months later. I was terrified. I had never been in a bikini in front of someone outside of my husband, right? And it was so scary to be so vulnerable when I was first starting to prep, because I just felt like I was so fat and so unacceptable still. I did my first show when I was 23. And honestly, I fell in love with being on stage. I've always loved being on stage, though. I mean, I grew up dancing. I grew up on a stage, and I think the bottom line was just I really love being on stage. and the fact that I was doing it, bronzed up in a glittery bikini, and being able to present my routine that I created for my posing and whatnot. It took me back to the days of being on stage as a kid on a dance company. I fell in love with it. I really did. Immediately following my first show, I went into that binge mode again, and I gained a lot of weight very rapidly. I felt so ashamed. I felt so embarrassed because I had to be in front of people, teaching them every day about fitness. I was a personal trainer at this point too, so training people and feeling like I just looked so ugly and so unacceptable. I was like, how can a trainer have fat on their body? Oh my God. My obsession with moving forward more with bodybuilding just pushed me further. At that point, I decided I wanted to try and become a pro. At this point, I was still natty. I was still natural. I wasn't using any drugs or any steroids to get ready for my first show. And moving towards my second show, I was still very adamant about staying natural. However, I realized that I was starting to move into a place of overtraining again. Now, overtraining is kind of what you would guess it would be. Basically, on a regular basis, us as humans, we experience points of fatigue, even within our day, within our week, within our month. We are tired because we are pushing ourselves too hard, and we're not getting enough rest, and we're not getting enough food. I know now that my calories were still too low, even with all the binging I was doing. I felt myself starting to prep for my second show and beginning to get fatigued and not have the energy, taking pre-workout wise, caffeine wise, food wise. Nothing seemed to be getting me past that point of fatigue. There's a point of kind of no return with it where you have to take a significant amount of time to rest in order to get back to be able to do things consistently. So my coach at the time presented me with an option. The option was to incorporate anabolic steroids to guarantee that I would not overtrain. The idea of not overtraining, of consistently having a way for my body to recover no matter how low my calories and how high my exercise output was so appealing to me that I was just like, fuck yeah, sign me up. So I immediately started on a very low dose of steroids, getting ready for my second show. Didn't tell anyone except my husband, who was very reluctant to agree with me on it, but ended up deciding, yeah, let's go for it. Second show went great. I had a blast again. I absolutely loved it. Stepped off stage and immediately started prep for the next show, which was exactly 6 months later. And I kept just kind of doing this 6 months after 6 months after 6 months on a show, not really allowing my body to fully recover. And with every show I was doing, I was upping my dosage or adding new drugs to my regimen. By the time I got to my final show, I decided to switch coaches to a gentleman who I would say didn't really know how to work with female bodybuilders at the time as far as dosage with their drugs. I didn't know much about it at the time, to be completely honest with you. My first coach didn't teach me much, and I didn't ever cycle off with my first coach. All of that being said, my second coach really loaded me up on drugs. I went with it because I was obsessed. I wanted to be qualified in the NPC, to be able to go to nationals, to be able to become a pro bodybuilder in the IFBB. It was all that I wanted. It was all that I dreamed about. I was mean to myself and to my husband. At this time, my marriage fell apart. Some of my best friendships fell apart. I was being very selfish, very self-centered, because all that I wanted was to be as lean and muscular as possible. Felt like that was the only thing that would mean that I was worthy of anything. Even being at my smallest points during prep or during my stage time, I still didn't feel like I was good enough. So for that final prep, I had 15 weeks to get ready with my new coach. Sadly, that coach decided in the 15-week prep that I was not allotted any type of cheat meals or cheat days whatsoever. I had grown accustomed to that, even with the periodic binging that I was experiencing on a daily or weekly basis. My coach would at least give me like a cheat meal or a cheat day where I could eat whatever I wanted. I decided this prep, I am going to override everything in my body. I am not going to binge at all. I'm not going to eat any extra food. I'm not going to go past anything that my coach gives me. It was really tough that this new coach decided that, in order for me to be lean enough, that I wasn't allotted any of that. Somehow went 15 weeks without messing up my diet or cheating one time. Not once. I looked insane. Like my body composition was crazy. Was more ripped than I'd ever been. Was doing so many drugs. I had no regard to what my hormones were doing, how my body was feeling. My period had been gone for years at this point, not only because I was on anabolic steroids that had my testosterone high, but also because my body fat was too low for my body to even be producing a period. It was in survival mode constantly. I had to take a boatload of pre-workout to get through my day and a boatload of NyQuil to sleep at night. I was consumed in how I was perceived. I had blinders on to everything else. Following my very last competition, I bet you can guess what happened. I went into an extreme binge mode where I was even stealing food from places to get my calories in. The pendulum had swung to the complete opposite side and I was out of control. My coach also didn't cycle me down very well, so my hormones were out of control. My acne had gone crazy. I was losing my hair. I had period cramps that were so severe that I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, but I wasn't having a period still. Of course, there was a significant weight gain at the time because I was binging all day, every day for a matter of months. I didn't understand why. I thought I was out of control. Like pros I was watching seemed to be able to just go on these extreme preps and not have this binge after. Like how could they not eat everything inside? I was so confused about it. So at this point I was divorced. I was trying to figure out about my living situation. I was extremely depressed. My body had changed again. My skin, my hair, even my voice had changed, you know. We can talk about that a little more in the future too. But my life was just falling apart. About a year, like a little over a year after my last show, I decided to try and prep again. I was dating a guy at the time who agreed to pay for my prep. It is very expensive to do, by the way. It's a very consuming sport. I began prepping with a completely different coach at the time, heaviest I'd ever been going into a prep. I think I was gonna be doing like a 6-month prep or something, so it was gonna be kind of slow and controlled. And then things kind of started shifting in me at that point. I'd gone through one of the roughest years of my life. I kind of started having a spiritual awakening where I realized that I was a lot more than my body. Crazy, right? My boyfriend at the time and I ended up splitting. I moved out into a place by myself for the first time in my entire life. I was trying to figure out if I could be a person who wasn't a competitive bodybuilder. Also, I was trying to figure out, can I be a woman not in a relationship? I've been in a relationship nonstop since I was 12, you know, like it was very strange to be out on my own, but the amount of self-actualizing I began to do and the realizations I was having about the ways that my body was responding was probably because I was doing something that it didn't like and that wasn't good for me. I really leaned into that. I really leaned into listening to my body. When I moved out on my own, I cycled myself off of the drugs I was on. I began to really think about what I was consuming. I was still going to the gym. I was still a trainer. I was still a group fitness instructor. So that was still definitely a part of my life. I realized that I couldn't live that life anymore. I couldn't push myself to those extremes anymore. I couldn't harm myself like that anymore. And I began to actually figure out what it meant to love myself and take care of myself. Okay, so that is my story for now. I know it was insanely long. Thank you so much for those of you who are still here. The next chapter that I will be going into, hopefully not in 3 weeks to a month, is revolving around what happened after I cycled off of drugs, after I decided I wasn't going to be a competitive bodybuilder anymore. What happened that allowed me to find and pursue eating disorder recovery by myself, successfully getting through it within a year. I could literally talk forever about this topic. This is something I'm really passionate about. And the reason that it's coming up now, the reason I'm feeling safe to share this, 8 years after being out of the gym, because right now I'm in the gym for the first time again. I'm figuring out what my passion for lifting looks like without me having to obsessively be there, without me having to obsessively change what I look like constantly, without me obsessively tracking my calories. I'm also on a dance company, an adult dance company, for the first time since I was 18 years old, and it feels really exciting to be finding ways to intentionally move my body again. I feel amazing. I really would love for those of you who are interested in this information to realize it doesn't have to be this cookie cutter, do this diet fail, exercise this way fail. You can find neutrality for your body, and you can even find love for your body. It's about finding ways to do things from a place of self-acceptance and self-love instead of self-hatred or disgust. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait till next time. I love you all.